Hey babies, it's your favorite host, Mr. BMG, back at it again with another episode. Let's get into it. Anyway, babies, I hope you've been having a great week and I've been doing what makes your heart full. I came across the story about Miguel, who is actually releasing an album called Chaos after I don't know how many years, but we'll wait for whatever that is to stop. Okay. But basically, Miguel is going to release new music on October 23rd, and the album is going to be called Chaos, or C-A-O-S. I don't know how he pronounces that, or if the omission of the H was intentional, or if it actually is, it just means something else, it's an abbreviation. But anyway, we're interested to know, besides Adorn, are we still curious about Miguel's music? You know, has too much time passed since his prime? Because there was definitely an era where Miguel was releasing music and it was a hit and it was popular amongst pop and R&B listeners. And to be honest, I almost feel like Miguel and The Weeknd were kind of in the same lane and in some ways indirectly pit against each other, and only one of them came out of that victorious, which is The Weeknd, because he's incredibly relevant now. And you know, Miguel made really great music, but it just didn't stand the test of time, his career. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. Is his music going to talk about where he's been, what he's been up to? How's the sound different? Is it going to be pop? Is it going to be R&B? Is it going to be country, metal, heavy metal, rock? Where is he at? And I think that'll probably be a defining factor in terms of if new music beyond that will be something he'll continue to do, or maybe this is just one of those chapters he needed to close and so release an album. It's just going to be very interesting to know what the inspiration behind it is. Does it translate, and does it actually get people to buy into him again? So yeah, Miguel, we'll be watching. So Ciara Wilson, aka CC, added Wilson to Future Wilburn Wilson's name. So essentially now the name is Future Wilburn Wilson, and there's just so much noise outside. Like, what the hell? What the yali? It's fucking irritating, isn't it? You just shut up and recording my blog. Thank you. Yo, it's a lot. But anyway, so Ciara changed or added Wilson to her son's surname because her son is through Future and they're no longer together, and essentially Ciara married Russell Wilson, and Russell was essentially an integral part of raising baby Future, and I guess they saw it fitting to acknowledge that role by adding his surname to the, you know, his full name. And I guess in some ways for them it would make sense, particularly if he's consenting of it, maybe that it was actually the kid's idea, you know, and, you know, they wanted to fit into the family, to have the same surname as everybody, and maybe they just have a beautiful relationship because he's been there since he was, maybe couldn't even speak, was an infant. So, you know, I guess it's just paying homage. And I guess what's probably grabbing the headlines is the fact that they're just mentioning added, and it kind of sounds ambiguous because it sounds like they removed, you know, his actual biological paternal father's surname off of his name, and no, that's actually not what happened. They added his stepfather's surname basically to his name to acknowledge. So it's actually very interesting. You don't necessarily see this happening quite a lot, and I think that's why it sparked a lot of debate. But I think the general sentiment is, if a person is present in your life and they're a father figure and you have that relationship with them, you know, paying them homage, I guess, only makes sense if it's the father that they've known. And you know, I guess it's also, for me, I kind of liken it to like adoption, because, you know, when people are given up for adoption, they don't necessarily know who their biological parents are, and they acknowledge their adoptive parents as their parents, regardless of the fact that they were given to them by other people and not necessarily biological. So sometimes in some ways it almost seems that way, that he's got his real father, but essentially due to the wife moving on, and I guess the father being consenting of this, because I feel like if he wasn't consenting, he probably would have said something about it by now, or maybe the process would not have even been allowed to unfold in some way. So if he's consenting and all parties are happy, who are we as the public to even like fight over if it's right or wrong? Let them do them. And, you know, everyone's talking about Ciara's prayer, and maybe Ciara's prayer was also to the fact that what she comes with, the man she dates and the man she marries, takes all of that as it's his own. So that is part of that prayer that we all pray Ciara for, or Ciara. That is all part of that prayer that we all praise Ciara for having, and I feel like this is just an extension to it, or of it. So if all parties are happy, good for them. So, oh my gosh, remove that. Yeah. So there has been quite a bit of controversy relating to Chris Brown's Atlanta tour, and apparently there were issues relating to getting into the stadium. Apparently there were long times of waiting, and some people's tickets were invalidated, and some essential logistical mess kind of happened. And, you know, now there's a lot of debate on if Chris Brown's tour has been sabotaged, if these are things that could have been avoided that he's to blame for, you know, if it's just a venue, an actual venue issue, nothing to do with Chris Brown. Like, there's a lot of different things that are happening, and I feel like many things can be true at the same time in different ways, and I feel like that's just maybe what this may be, because we don't actually know what the truth is. We can only speculate. Everything is always alleged. But I mean, from what it looks like, a lot of people still say they enjoyed their concert, despite the, I guess, back and forth with people who are being let into the venue or not being let into the venue. It just looks like a very, maybe circumstance specific, because certain cities, according to, you know, the reports as well, or allegedly according to the streets, have also been saying that their cities have been going well, or participants or people who are actually going to watch the concerts in different cities, some didn't experience any problems, some did. So I guess it's not a universal issue, and it could just be depending on a particular leg, the people involved in that particular leg. He also did say that he's never been on a world tour, or not a world tour, but he's never been on a stadium tour, and so maybe this is also a growth aspect for him, or like him sort of learning how to navigate that. Don't know if that's just an excuse or not, but you'll never really know. But yeah, man, like, I feel like, particularly me, knowing how impatient I am, if I have to wait for 2 hours just to get into a stadium, especially when I arrive just on time, just to make sure that I'm not waiting too long, one, for the person to start performing, and two, to even get into the stadium, I would be pretty frustrated as well. Who's to blame is also very complicated, because is Chris Brown in charge of making sure that people get into the stadium? I think because he's talent, there are other people he delegates for, you know, for him to do that, and there are people who are literally like managing this whole production, who he's got basically nothing to do with, because he's just the talent in the front. So people will blame obviously him because it's his concert, but there's a lot of people who are around him who he would have to delegate. So yeah, it's a very complicated one. I do feel like it is what it is for the people who went, and if you guys really want to see him, then you're going to have to, I guess, hope that your venue does not have those issues, but also, I guess, know that there's like more than one side to the story, because that's just always the fact of life. There's your side, my side, and then there's the truth. So yeah, Chris Brown, I still think he's a great artist. He actually also, interestingly, beyond just this whole, you know, logistics of holding like a stadium tour, he started, I guess, putting himself in the equation of Beyonce, Michael Jackson, and Usher, and essentially saying that those four artists are like the greatest artists. Singles out Michael Jackson as being the greatest of all time, but kind of putting himself in the same conversation of Beyonce, Usher, and him being the top performers. Now, I don't know if self-proclamation kind of makes certain things look like they don't necessarily fit. Because sometimes, like, for example, with Beyonce, right? Beyonce, you'll never necessarily hear Beyonce boasting about the fact that, or even debating about the fact that who's better or who's the greatest of all time. Because I think it is. She doesn't have to say it. If she says it, then it almost takes it away from her. Does that make sense? So I almost feel like, even with Chris Brown, even having that conversation about the fact that, hey, he's one of the greatest, I think in some ways, yes, people really, I guess, receive it and acknowledge the fact that he's great, but I think in some ways it also takes away from the fact that, well, if you're desperately, like, trying to exert that to the world, then it's almost like not necessarily giving the room for people to actually say that about you, out of just saying it based on recognition of recognition of your talent, the way people speak about Beyonce. And obviously, the difference between him and Beyonce is also the favor of the media, because Beyonce's always had the favor of the media, and so and Chris Brown has kind of always had the favor of the media, but in a negative way, in a way that kind of paints him out to be not necessarily in the best possible light, but it's still the favor of the media in any case, because they still talked about him. They didn't ignore him, is what I'm trying to say. So in some ways, all of the attention is still used and monetized in many ways. But I don't know, I don't know how I felt about him mentioning those four. Also Usher, like, I think Usher is like a great artist, but for some reason I just wouldn't put him in like the conversation of Beyonce and Michael Jackson. I think Beyonce and Michael Jackson are very two specific artists that are frontrunners in just their respective generations. Michael, when he was alive, when he was in his prime, he was really like an iconic performance artist for that generation. Same with Beyonce. And I wouldn't necessarily put the other two in the conversation, I think, just on longevity alone, because Beyonce's been around for longer, and Usher's also been around for longer, but he hasn't necessarily maintained his prime as long as Beyonce has maintained her prime. So, and Chris Brown is still in his active years, but I wouldn't necessarily already say, I mean, he is definitely a generational talent, but I think he's young enough to still be not necessarily put on that pedestal of a 50 or a 40-something-year-old talent who has been active for more than 30 years, or for around 30 years, and is now really like, there's nothing more they could accomplish type of thing. I think there is certain things that he could still accomplish. He's a great artist, but I just wouldn't say that him, Usher, are in the same conversation as Beyonce and Michael Jackson. I think those are two different tiers of artists. Only also I'm thinking about the fact that Chris Brown used to literally open for Beyonce. So for us to put him in the same conversation as Beyonce when you were an opening act for Beyonce when she was already well established when you were trying to find your feet, I don't think necessarily, I think Chris Brown and Rihanna and your Nickies, those people, and Drake's, I can put them in a tier because I feel like they all kind of started in and around the same time. They were like mid 2000s to late 2000s. That was the bracket of talent that came in, particularly black artists who really like became chart toppers. So I would put them in a genre, and then I'd put Beyonce in a different genre, because she was a slightly different generation to that. She came out just before that. You'd have to compare Beyonce to her peers, and I don't think her peers are the generation that came after her, is what I'm trying to basically get to. So, interesting conversation. Don't know if it's a reach, but I also can't take away from the fact that Chris Brown is very talented. It's definitely the greatest in his lane, and has maintained that, and has evolved, and is beautiful to see. So, definitely not taking anything away from him. So, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while now, and the conversation is around how African music has become so saturated because a lot of non-African artists are appropriating the sound into their music and selling it as African music, but not necessarily. And so the reason why I sort of wanted to talk about this is because where does that leave African musicians? Where does that put them in the greater landscape of dominating the international genre and musical landscape? People like Keith Sweat, Ciara, Chris Brown, the list literally goes on. Like Drake, many of the biggest artists have collaborated with African artists, or have also incorporated African music into their catalog, and that's definitely helped to make African music very mainstream, but also in some ways at the cost of the decreasing marginal utility of it. So how when you're oversaturated, too much of one thing is not a good thing and you start to get sick of it. I think when we had African music, not necessarily in the underground, but within the mainstream, but with, in some ways, its gatekeepers, I think it kept the purity of it, because it's definitely evolved. Afrobeats and African music now, how it sounds now is very different to how it sounded in the 2010s to how it sounded in the 2000s. It's definitely evolved in some ways, but one could say that it's been in some ways diluted because so many people are appropriating it, it's by default becoming mainstream. And when something becomes mainstream, it has to become popular. When something becomes popular, it becomes safe and palatable, and it's got a pop ring to it, and not necessarily the essence of the actual music. And I feel like because of that, it starts to sound repetitive, and because of that, people get sick of it. And I think the people who take the fall for all of that are African artists, because at the end of the day, they were not cosplaying as African artists because it was hot, it was in the moment. This is their music, this is what they make, and so they would have to rebuild the industry. So I feel like it's definitely a double-edged sword that African music has become so appreciated, and people have sought to maybe make a song that sounds African for a viral moment, but I think it's also kind of in some ways cheapened the brand and taken away from the people who have always made that. So it's a very, very interesting analogy, but I think I just thought I needed to talk about it because it's actually getting out of hand. While I appreciate and think imitation is the highest form of flattery, I think also we need to, use it sparingly. So, have your moment with African music, y'all, in music industry, and use it wisely. Grow it, don't dilute it. Or grow it, don't necessarily destroy it. This has been such a musical episode, and I really do love music, to be honest. Like, today is such a beautiful day. The way the sun is shining today is so special, and it's something I've never seen. They say it's an eclipse, and maybe that's what's causing it to shine so beautifully. It's just really such a beautiful day. It kind of reminds me of the way the sun shines in California, because something about California that I always just like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful, it's so stunning. And it's very special. Like, the way the sun shines there is very nostalgic. Very, very nostalgic. Don't know why that came to mind, but it feels that way. And it's just feeling really beautiful today. The sun is just like having one of those days. It's having a good day. Like a stunning day. But and off of the back of that, I woke up this morning today, which felt very special, very good. But I woke up thinking about the song called What I Want by Wallen. And I also remember thinking about how I actually spoke about Wallen recently when I was saying he was dominating the charts. Like, literally almost maybe 6 or 7 of the positions in the top 10, Billboard Hot 100 top 10 were his songs. And I was like, well, I haven't even listened to any one of these songs. Like, who is this person? Why don't I know about them? Obviously, I knew about them because there was a song that I've always known of them, Thought You Should Know, that I've always just loved. But then I was like, well, what's going on? Like, why is everyone listening to this person? Until I also got into or came across a song of theirs, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. And also kind of really reaffirmed and showcased how versatile my musical taste is. And yeah, there's a song called What I Want, and it's one of his newest songs released, I think, 3 months ago, according to YouTube, and it's really good. It's so special. It's featuring Tate McRae, and Tate kind of sounds like Britney a little bit, you know. I don't really listen to her music. This was kind of the first song that I have listened to where she's on it, but she kind of sounds like a little sassy, girly from the 2000s. So she sounds a little bit like Britney, but really I think her little verse was quite a great addition to the song. The song is perfect on its own, and I really, really love it. It feels like a country pop crossover, and just has really great energy. I can see how it's got mass appeal. I can see everything about it is so just refreshing and great, and I really love it. And I'm like, Morgan Wallen clearly is very talented, and yeah, definitely taking back all the shit that I said, but I also know that he maybe is more of an album artist, right? In the sense that when he creates music, he creates art, he creates a body of work. He doesn't necessarily have only one hit song. He has a collection of songs that he curates that hooks everybody, and so helps him to dominate the whole chart because he's got a very strong body of work. He just doesn't have like one Beyonce song on the album and everything else is just like trash. Looks like he's got quite a lot of songs. So I haven't listened to the whole album, the new album that he released, but I definitely know What I Want is What I Want, and What I Want by Morgan Wallen is the girl that she thinks she is. So good on you, Morgan Wallen, for the song. And I know it's not musical note because it's the summer anymore, because we are definitely heading into the fall. It is now September, but we're talking about music and the summer. Well, we're talking about music and just Morgan Wallen because we listen to music whatever season it is, and it was my season, and it was the moment for me to speak about him because his music has been ringing in my head. So yeah, music makes the world go round, so we should always speak about it. Anyway, babies, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Messiest Bitch on the Internet. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and also follow us on Instagram at BigBunnyEntertainment_, and I'll see you again on the next one.